The grand ballroom of Blackthorn Estate shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers while violins sang through the crowded hall like delicate ghosts. Glided across the marble floor draped in silk and diamonds, laughing behind jeweled fans as servants hurried between them carrying silver trays filled with wine. Every corner of the estate overflowed with wealth, pride, and the quiet cruelty that followed powerful people wherever they gathered. Alice moved through the crowd, keeping her gaze lowered as she balanced a tray of crystal glasses against trembling fingers. At 23, she had already learned how invisible a servant could become among nobles. Men brushed past her without apology. Women looked through her as though she were another decoration against the wall. She had grown accustomed to silence, but mockery still pierced deeper than she admitted. She was not breathtaking like the ladies dancing beneath the chandeliers. Her brown hair remained tied in a simple ribbon at the nape of her neck, and her pale blue dress had been repaired so many times that tiny stitches lined the sleeves like scars. Yet there was softness in her eyes, a quiet warmth that appeared whenever she smiled at frightened kitchen maids or exhausted stable boys. Some servants adored her because she listened when nobody else cared enough to ask questions. Unfortunately, kindness carried little value inside Blackthorn Estate. "Careful, plain girl," a noblewoman sneered as Alice passed nearby. "You might spill wine on someone important." Laughter rippled through the group surrounding her. Alice lowered her eyes politely. "My apologies, my lady." Another woman examined Alice with exaggerated pity. "Honestly, she looks more suited for a monastery than a ballroom." The women laughed harder. Alice continued walking despite the humiliation burning across her cheeks. Responding would only worsen things. Servants survived by swallowing pain before it reached their mouths. At the far end of the ballroom, heavy doors suddenly opened. Conversations faltered instantly. Duke Adrienne entered the hall, his black formal coat fitting perfectly across broad shoulders. Candlelight reflected against silver cufflinks at his wrists while nobles straightened instinctively in his presence. At 25, Adrienne possessed everything society admired: wealth, intelligence, influence, and a face sculpted with almost unfair perfection. Yet his greatest reputation came from his coldness. People respected him because they feared him. Women adored him from a distance. Adrienne surveyed the ballroom with detached indifference, acknowledging bows with slight nods while musicians hurried into a grander melody. Every noble family hoped to secure his attention tonight, but his expression remained unreadable. Flirtation bored him, compliments irritated him, most conversations felt hollow. As he approached the center of the hall, Alice instinctively stepped backward to avoid obstructing his path. She focused carefully on the tray balanced against her palms, hoping to disappear before he noticed her existence. Then someone struck her shoulder sharply. Alice stumbled backward. The tray slipped from her hands. Crystal shattered across marble floors as dark red wine splashed violently against the Duke's white sleeve. Silence swallowed the ballroom. Alice's heart nearly stopped. "Oh dear," a woman whispered dramatically. "She ruined his coat." Alice dropped immediately to her knees. "Your Grace, I am so sorry, I didn't mean." "Of course she didn't," another noblewoman interrupted with a mocking smile. "Perhaps she simply wanted the Duke to notice her for once." Soft laughter spread through the room again. Alice felt dozens of eyes studying her humiliation. Adrian stared at the stains soaking through his sleeve. Irritation flickered briefly across his sharp features before his gaze settled upon the trembling servant kneeling before him. She looked terrified, but there was dignity in the way she kept herself composed despite the cruelty surrounding her. For one strange moment, he almost told the crowd to leave her alone. Then he noticed nobles watching him expectantly. Years of pride hardened his expression instantly. "I'll never understand," Adrian said coldly, "why servants insist on making spectacles of themselves." The words struck Alice harder than the laughter. She lowered her head further. "I apologize, Your Grace." A cruel smile touched one noblewoman's lips. Perhaps the poor girl imagined a duke might fall in love with her after this. Several people laughed openly now. Adrian should have ignored the comment. Instead, he heard himself answer, "I would never love a plain girl." The ballroom erupted with vicious amusement. Alice froze. The words echoed through her chest with brutal clarity, exposing every insecurity she had spent years trying to bury. She knew she lacked beauty by noble standards, yet hearing those thoughts spoken aloud before an entire ballroom shattered something inside her that pride could not protect. Adrian noticed the faint tremor in her breathing. For the first time that evening, guilt touched him unexpectedly. But he buried it beneath arrogance before anyone could notice. "Leave this estate by dawn," he said flatly. "You embarrass Blackthorn merely by standing here." No servant dared speak. Alice rose slowly from the shattered glass, ignoring the tiny cuts bleeding across her hands. Her eyes glistened with restrained tears, though she fought desperately to maintain composure. "Yes, your grace," she whispered. Then she walked away, while nobles continued murmuring behind jeweled fans. Adrienne watched her disappear through the ballroom doors. Something about her silence unsettled him more than anger ever could. Hours later, the celebration finally ended, but the unease remained lodged beneath his ribs like a splinter. He dismissed musicians, ignored lingering guests, and retreated alone toward his private chambers. Rain tapped against tall windows while servants removed his stained coat in nervous silence. "Was the girl dismissed?" Adrienne asked suddenly. A servant bowed carefully. "She is packing her belongings now, your grace." Adrienne nodded once, pretending indifference. Yet long after midnight, he still stood beside the dark window overlooking the estate grounds. Below, a single lantern moved slowly through the servants' quarters. Alice preparing to leave. He told himself her departure meant nothing. She was merely another servant. Still, when dawn finally approached, sleep never came to him once. By sunrise, Alice had vanished from Blackthorn Estate without farewell or complaint. The servants discovered her room stripped bare except for a pressed lavender flower resting upon the windowsill beside the open curtains. Some her quietly. Others assumed she would disappear into poverty like countless dismissed workers before her. Inside the estate, life resumed with cruel efficiency, yet the absence of the quiet servant girl lingered in ways nobody expected. Especially for Duke Adrienne. For several mornings after her departure, Adrienne found himself glancing toward the ballroom doors during breakfast, half expecting to see a shy figure carrying tea trays through the corridors. Each time he realized she was gone, irritation tightened inside him unexpectedly. He dismissed the feeling as inconvenience, though the explanation never satisfied him. One evening, his closest advisor noticed his mood during a formal dinner. "You seem distracted tonight, your grace." Adrienne swirled wine inside his crystal glass. "Do I? You have ignored 3 attempting to capture your attention. That sounds peaceful rather than concerning." His advisor chuckled carefully, but Adrienne's expression remained distant. The truth unsettled him more than he wished to admit. Since Alice left, every noble gathering had become unbearable. Conversations sounded rehearsed, smiles appeared artificial. Wealthy daughters praised his title while revealing nothing genuine about themselves. For years, Adrienne believed coldness protected him from disappointment, yet now emptiness followed him through every room like a persistent shadow. Meanwhile, far beyond the capital, Alice stepped from a crowded carriage into the seaside town of. Salt filled the air while waves crashed against rocky cliffs beneath a pale afternoon sky. The town lacked the grandeur of Blackthorn Estate, but its narrow streets carried warmth that wealth never created. Fishermen greeted neighbors openly. Children laughed while chasing one another near market stalls. Nobody stared at Alice long enough to judge her appearance. She rented a tiny attic room above a bakery using nearly all her remaining coins. The ceiling leaked during storms, and the mattress felt thinner than folded blankets, but for the first time in years, silence surrounded her without cruelty attached to it. Finding work proved far more difficult. Several shopkeepers refused to hire strangers. Others demanded impossible hours for miserable wages. Alice spent days walking through unfamiliar streets with aching feet before an elderly florist finally offered her temporary employment. The flower shop stood near cliffs, where ocean wind drifted through the open doorway carrying scents of salt and roses together. Its owner possessed silver hair, sharp eyes, and weathered hands stained permanently green from years tending plants. "You know how to arrange flowers?" asked skeptically. "A little," Alice admitted softly. "I used to help maintain gardens at Blackthorn Estate." Studied her for a moment. "You look exhausted." Alice forced a faint smile. "I am willing to work hard." "That was not my question." The unexpected kindness nearly brought tears to Alice's eyes. Sighed gently. "Start tomorrow morning." The work challenged her immediately. She carried heavy buckets before sunrise, swept floors, trimmed stems, and delivered bouquets across town regardless of rain or exhaustion. At night, she repaired torn dresses beside candlelight to earn extra coins for rent. Some evenings, hunger gnawed painfully through her stomach because she chose cheaper bread over proper meals. Yet despite the hardship, something inside her slowly began healing. Treated her less like a servant and more like family. Customers thanked Alice whenever she wrapped flowers for anniversaries or funerals. Nobody mocked her plain dresses, nobody laughed at her silence. One afternoon, while arranging white lilies beside the shop window, Alice noticed a young bride crying quietly outside. "I forgot our anniversary," the woman confessed after entering the shop. "Perhaps flowers will remind him I still matter." Alice selected pale roses and tied them with lavender ribbon. Flowers cannot force someone to love you, she said gently, but they can remind people not to take love for granted. The bride smiled through tears. You speak as though your heart has been broken before. Alice lowered her eyes, something like that. As weeks turned into months, her arrangements became increasingly admired throughout. Alice possessed unusual instinct with colors and textures. She combined simple flowers into designs that felt emotional rather than extravagant. People claimed her bouquets carried comfort within them. Even eventually admitted business improved dramatically after Alice arrived. You have gentle hands, the older woman told her one evening while closing the shop. Flowers bloom brighter around kindness. Alice laughed softly. Nobody has ever described me that way. Then those people were blind. The words stayed with her long afterward. Back in the capital, Adrienne's restlessness deepened. During another royal banquet, a count's daughter draped herself beside him confidently. You must marry eventually, your grace. Must I? Adrienne replied without interest. A powerful man deserves a beautiful wife. For reasons he could not explain, irritation flared instantly. Beautiful. The word reminded him of trembling blue eyes and shattered humiliation across a ballroom floor. He set his wine glass down sharply enough to silence nearby conversation. Beauty becomes meaningless when cruelty poisons it, he said coldly. The woman stared at him, stunned. Adrienne rose abruptly and left the banquet before anyone could stop him. Rain poured outside as he crossed dark palace corridors alone. Sleep abandoned him again that night, just as it had countless nights since Alice disappeared. Frustration eventually drove him toward the estate gardens shortly before dawn. There, waiting beside his doorstep, rested a delivered bouquet. White roses, blue lilies, lavender woven carefully between them. His heartbeat slowed dangerously. Tied around the stems was a small lavender ribbon identical to the flower left inside Alice's empty room. Adrienne stared at the arrangement for several silent seconds before turning sharply toward the nearest servant. Who made this? He demanded. The servant swallowed nervously. A florist from your grace. For the first time in months, something fiercely alive awakened inside Adrienne. Adrienne left for before sunrise without informing anyone at Blackthorn Estate. Rain lashed violently against his carriage windows while horses raced across muddy roads beneath a darkening sky. His advisors would consider the journey reckless for something as insignificant as flowers, yet Adrienne understood the truth now with painful clarity. He was not chasing a bouquet. He was chasing the feeling he lost the moment Alice walked away from him forever. For months he had buried regret beneath arrogance, pretending his restlessness would fade naturally. Instead, her absence hollowed every corner of his life. He remembered the trembling strength in her voice despite humiliation. He remembered her silence more vividly than any noblewoman's laughter. Most disturbingly, he remembered the tears she fought desperately to hide after he shattered her dignity before an entire ballroom. The storm finally weakened near dawn as emerged beside the sea cliffs like a painted dream washed in pale gold. Adrienne stepped from the carriage with exhaustion pulling heavily at his body, yet his pulse quickened the moment he noticed the small flower shop facing the ocean. Fresh lavender hung beside the doorway. His chest tightened painfully. Inside, shelves overflowed with roses, lilies, and bundles of wildflowers tied carefully with ribbon. Everything felt warm and alive compared to the cold grandeur of Blackthorn Estate. Adrienne moved farther into the shop, studying arrangements displayed near the windows, when he heard footsteps outside. Then he saw her. Alice stood beneath the early sunlight arranging flowers into wicker baskets beside the entrance. Ocean wind tugged gently against loose strands of brown hair escaping her ribbon. She looked thinner than before, though stronger somehow, as though hardship had carved quiet resilience into her posture. Her simple blue dress carried faint traces of soil from morning work, yet Adrienne thought she looked more beautiful than every jeweled woman he had ever known. Not polished, not dazzling, real. Alice lifted another bundle of white roses before sensing someone watching her. The moment her eyes met Adrienne's, the flowers slipped from her hands onto the stone path below. Shock crossed her face instantly. Your Grace. Hearing her voice again unsettled him more than expected. For several seconds neither spoke. Waves crashed against cliffs nearby while seabirds circled overhead, filling the silence stretching painfully between them. Finally, Adrienne stepped forward slowly. Alice. She lowered her gaze first. I did not expect to see you here. That makes two of us. A faint crease appeared between her brows as though she could not determine whether this meeting belonged to reality or memory. Adrienne noticed small healing cuts across her fingers from endless work. Something about those wounds disturbed him deeply because he realized she had suffered while he remained surrounded by luxury. I received your flowers, he said quietly. They were for the palace, she answered carefully, not specifically for you. Even so, I recognized them immediately. Alice bent to collect the fallen roses before he could help her. You should return to the capital, your grace, has little to offer someone like you. Her politeness hurt more than anger would have. Adrienne watched her gather flowers with calm precision, yet he sensed distance hidden beneath every movement. Months ago she had looked at him with nervous admiration. Now caution guarded her expression instead. I was cruel to you, he admitted suddenly. Alice froze briefly before continuing her work. That night is over. Not for me. The confession surprised even him. She finally looked up again, uncertainty flickering across her eyes. I spoke without thinking, Adrienne continued. I allowed pride and arrogance to turn me into someone I despise. You are a duke, Alice replied softly. Pride follows powerful men naturally. That is not an excuse. The sincerity in his voice unsettled her. This was not the untouchable nobleman from Blackthorn's ballroom. Exhaustion shadowed his sharp features and regret lingered openly in his eyes. Alice swallowed carefully. Why come here now? Because I could not forget you. The answer remained trapped inside him. Instead, Adrienne said, I wanted to apologize properly. She studied him silently, perhaps searching for mockery hidden beneath his words, but none existed. Adrienne realized with uncomfortable clarity that her opinion mattered more than anyone else's ever had. Emerged from inside the shop carrying fresh lavender bundles, her sharp eyes moved immediately between them. So, the older woman said dryly, this is the Duke responsible for those sleepless nights. Alice flushed crimson. I should leave, Adrienne interrupted quickly, but folded her arms. Nonsense, since your grace traveled all this way you may at least carry flower crates while apologizing. To Adrienne's surprise, Alice almost smiled. The expression transformed her completely. Over the following days, Adrienne remained in under the excuse of inspecting coastal trade routes, though everyone understood the truth except perhaps Alice herself. Each morning he visited the flower shop pretending interest in arrangements while secretly memorizing every detail about her new life. He learned she skipped meals whenever business slowed. He learned townspeople trusted her because she listened carefully to their sorrows. Most importantly, he learned she smiled more freely here than she ever had at Blackthorn Estate. One evening, Adrienne carried heavy flower baskets alongside Alice toward the harbor market, while sunset painted the ocean crimson and gold. You are terrible at this, Alice observed quietly as he nearly dropped another basket. I manage armies better than flowers. That is obvious. A rare laugh escaped him unexpectedly. Alice glanced sideways in surprise because the sound carried genuine warmth rather than cold amusement. You laugh differently now, she murmured. Adrienne looked toward the sea, perhaps because I finally have reason to. Silence settled between them again, though this time it felt softer. Days passed quickly after that. Adrienne helped repair shelves inside the shop, walked beside Alice through seaside markets, and listened whenever she spoke about simple things she loved: ocean sunsets, lavender fields, children buying flowers for their mothers. Slowly he realized she viewed beauty differently than the nobility surrounding him his entire life. To Alice, beauty existed within kindness, patience, and sincerity rather than wealth or status. The realization humbled him painfully. One night, while standing alone outside the flower shop, Adrienne finally admitted the truth he had resisted for months. He loved her. Not because she challenged him. Not because guilt haunted him. But because Alice made him feel human instead of powerful. Determined at last, Adrienne purchased a silver ring from his jeweler the following morning. His hands tightened around the small velvet box as he walked toward the flower shop, rehearsing words that suddenly felt impossible to speak. Before he reached the entrance, stepped outside holding a cream-colored envelope. This arrived for you, she said carefully. Adrienne frowned before opening it. The moment he read the elegant handwriting inside, every trace of warmth vanished from his face. Alice and Lord Hale request the honor of your presence at their wedding ceremony. Adrienne read the wedding invitation 3 times before the words fully settled into his mind. Each sentence felt unreal, as though someone had driven a blade slowly through his chest while he stood helplessly watching. Alice was marrying another man. The woman whose smile had thawed the coldest parts of him now belonged to someone else because he had realized his feelings too late. Studied him carefully from the doorway of the flower shop. You should have spoken sooner, she said quietly. Adrienne's fingers tightened around the invitation until the paper crumpled slightly. When is the ceremony? This afternoon. The answer struck him like a physical blow. For several seconds he stood motionless while panic spread beneath his ribs with terrifying intensity. Duke Adrian had faced political conspiracies, ruthless negotiations, and threats from rival nobles without fear. Yet the thought of losing Alice forever reduced him to something fragile and desperate. Without another word, he turned sharply toward his horse. The ride to the church became a blur of pounding hooves, ocean wind, and unbearable regret. Adrian barely noticed villagers shouting as he raced through narrow streets. One thought repeated endlessly inside his mind. "You are too late." Memories tortured him throughout the journey. Alice kneeling among shattered glass while nobles laughed. Alice arranging flowers beside the sea with quiet grace. Alice smiling softly whenever he struggled carrying heavy baskets through the market. Every moment reminded him how carelessly he once treated the only person who ever brought peace into his life. By the time the church appeared atop the cliffs, Adrian's heartbeat thundered violently inside his chest. Music drifted through the open doors. The ceremony had already begun. Fear unlike anything he had experienced before gripped him completely. Not fear of humiliation or rejection, but fear of arriving moments too late to change his future forever. He entered the church without hesitation. Conversations stopped immediately. Guests turned in shock as the feared Duke strode down the aisle with rain still clinging to his dark coat. Sunlight filtered through stained glass windows, illuminating rows of startled faces before finally settling upon the woman standing near the altar. Alice. She wore a simple white gown trimmed with delicate lace, her brown hair falling softly over her shoulders instead of being tied back neatly as usual. She looked breathtaking in a way no jeweled noblewoman ever had, not distant or untouchable but warm enough to make his chest ache painfully. When her eyes met his, surprise flashed across her face. "Your Grace," she whispered. Beside her stood Lord Hale, a tall nobleman with calm gray eyes, and an expression balanced carefully between confusion and amusement. The priest cleared his throat nervously. "Your Grace, this is highly inappropriate." "I know," Adrian interrupted hoarsely. Every gaze remained fixed upon him as he moved farther down the aisle. Pride urged him to stop. Dignity demanded silence, yet neither mattered anymore. Only Alice mattered. "Step slightly forward, you are interrupting my wedding." Adrian finally looked at him directly, "Then I apologize." The sincerity stunned everyone. Alice stared at Adrian as though seeing an entirely different man standing before her. The cold Duke from Blackthorn Estate would never apologize publicly, especially not while vulnerable. Yet exhaustion, fear, and love stripped away every wall Adrian once hid behind. "I came because I cannot let this happen without speaking honestly first," he said, his voice unsteady. Silence filled the church. Adrian turned fully toward Alice. "I spent years believing strength meant never needing anyone. Then you left Blackthorn Estate, and suddenly everything I valued became empty." Her eyes widened slowly. "I tried forgetting you," he continued. "I buried myself in work, attended endless banquets, listened to countless beautiful women speak to me, but none of them made me feel alive the way you did." Alice's fingers trembled against her bouquet. "You were kind when the world gave you every reason to become bitter," Adrian said softly, "and I rewarded that kindness with cruelty." Pain flickered across her expression at the memory. "I cannot undo what I said that night," he admitted. "But if I spend the rest of my life regretting anything, it will be the moment I made you believe you were ordinary." The church remained utterly silent except for distant ocean waves outside. Adrian took another step closer. "You were never plain, Alice. I was simply too blind to recognize beauty until after I destroyed it." Tears filled her eyes instantly. Glanced awkwardly between them before muttering, "Well, this is becoming emotionally overwhelming." Nobody laughed. Adrian barely noticed anyone else anymore. "I love you," he confessed finally, the words rough with emotion. "I love your kindness, your strength, your patience, and the way flowers seem brighter whenever you touch them. I love the woman who rebuilt herself after I shattered her dignity." Alice covered her mouth, trembling. "And if marrying you means surrendering my pride entirely," Adrian whispered, "then I would gladly kneel before the entire kingdom." Gasps echoed through the church as the mighty Duke of slowly dropped to one knee before her. Alice's tears spilled freely now. Adrian looked up at her with raw vulnerability. "Please do not marry someone else while I still have breath left to fight for you." Several guests appeared close to tears themselves. Then unexpectedly sighed dramatically beside the altar. "To be honest," he announced, "this wedding was never real." Adrian blinked. The church erupted into confused murmuring. Rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. Alice asked for my help after growing tired of waiting for a certain emotionally constipated Duke to confess his feelings. Adrienne stared at Alice in complete disbelief. Color flooded her cheeks instantly. It sounded less ridiculous when we planned it. For one stunned moment, silence lingered. Then Adrienne laughed. Not a polite chuckle or cold amusement, but genuine laughter filled with overwhelming relief. The sound startled everyone because nobody inside the church had ever imagined the feared Duke capable of such warmth. Alice laughed softly through tears. You looked absolutely terrified. I was terrified, Adrienne admitted. You nearly destroyed me. And you deserved it a little. Probably. Still smiling, Adrienne rose slowly before reaching into his coat pocket. The small velvet box he had carried since morning and opened it carefully between them. I intended to do this properly before receiving your invitation, he said quietly, though apparently you enjoy causing suffering. Alice laughed again despite her tears. Inside the box rested a delicate silver ring shaped with tiny lavender flowers around the band. Her breath caught softly. Adrienne took her trembling hand. Alice, will you allow me the privilege of spending my life proving how wrong I was about you? Emotion shone openly across her face now, no longer hidden behind caution or fear. Yes, she whispered. The answer shattered the final walls around Adrienne's heart. He slipped the ring onto her finger before pulling her gently into his arms. Sunlight poured through stained glass windows as he kissed her softly, while applause erupted throughout the church around them. And for the first time in many years, Duke Adrienne no longer felt cold inside.